Ethan stepped off the transport ship, his boots hitting the soft, alien soil. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flowers, and the sky above him was a pale shade of purple. He had traveled far, beyond Earth's farthest borders, to reach this distant planet. It was strange to think that just a few months ago, he had been sitting in a small office in Washington, answering emails. Now, he was standing on a world where humans had never set foot. He was part of a diplomatic mission, and his job was simple: to represent humanity and build connections with the alien species living here. But simple didn't always mean easy. The planet's inhabitants were unlike anything Ethan had ever seen before. They were tall, with shimmering skin that changed colors depending on their mood. Their eyes, large and almond-shaped, were a deep shade of blue that almost seemed to glow in the dim light of the alien evening. He couldn't help but stare as they passed by, their movements graceful and purposeful. The people here weren't just physically different. They had a culture that seemed completely foreign to him. Ethan had read the reports, learned about the customs, and prepared as best as he could. But no amount of preparation could replace the experience of being here. He felt small, like a child in a new school, unsure of how to act, what to say, or how to fit in. As the group made its way toward the city, the sounds of alien music and soft voices filled the air. The city itself was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, too. The buildings were towering, made from a material that shimmered and shifted colors, as though the entire city was alive. The streets were wide and filled with people moving in every direction, their conversations a symphony of strange and melodic words. At the heart of the city stood a large structure, its design elegant and majestic. It looked like a cross between a palace and a temple, with tall, sweeping arches and glowing symbols carved into the walls. This was where Ethan was headed, to meet Zara, one of the most important diplomats of the alien people. Zara had been one of the first to reach out to humanity. Her people had been watching Earth for years, and she was chosen to lead the first official contact with humanity. Ethan had heard much about her intelligence, her beauty, and her strength. He had even seen her on holo images, but seeing her in person was something else entirely. When they finally reached the building, Zara was waiting at the entrance. She stood tall, her posture confident, her blue eyes studying Ethan as he approached. She was everything the reports had described and more. Her skin shimmered like the surface of a calm lake, and her long, dark hair seemed to float around her, like it was caught in an invisible breeze. "Ethan," she said, her voice musical and clear. "Welcome to our world." Ethan nodded, feeling nervous under her gaze. "Thank you for having me," he replied, his voice sounding strange in the vast, echoing hall. Zara smiled, and it was as though the entire room brightened. "Come, there is much to discuss." She led him inside, and the door closed silently behind them. The building was even more beautiful inside, with intricate patterns and shapes carved into the walls, and soft lights that seemed to glow without a source. The air was cool, and the scent of flowers was stronger here, mixing with the faint fragrance of something sweet that Ethan couldn't quite place. As they walked, Zara spoke of her people's history, their rise from a primitive species to the advanced civilization they had become. She told him of their journey through the stars, their search for knowledge, and their hopes for peace with humanity. Ethan listened, fascinated. The more Zara spoke, the more he realized how little he truly knew about these aliens. Everything he thought he understood about first contact was turned upside down by the reality of this strange new world. When they reached the center of the building, Zara stopped. She turned to him with a serious look in her eyes. "We must talk about our customs," she said, her tone suddenly more formal. "The way we interact with one another. It may seem unusual to you, but it is very important to us." Ethan furrowed his brow, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" Zara took a step closer. "In our culture, sharing a bed is a sign of trust and respect. It is how we build bonds with one another. It may seem strange to you, but this is how we welcome you." Ethan blinked, confused. "Sharing a bed," he repeated, unsure if he had heard her right. Zara nodded, her expression calm and serious. It is a custom here, to show you that we trust you and to help you understand our ways. I invite you to share my bed for the night." Ethan felt a rush of heat rise to his cheeks. This was not what he had expected when he signed up for this mission. Sharing a bed with an alien diplomat, it was more than he had bargained for. But he could see the sincerity in Zara's eyes, and he knew this was part of the process, part of the cultural exchange. That was so important for humanity's future. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I understand," he said, his voice steady despite his confusion. Zara gave him a small smile and led him toward a private chamber, her steps graceful and calm. Ethan followed, his heart pounding in his chest. What had he gotten himself into? Ethan followed Zara down the long, elegant hallway, his footsteps echoing softly in the stillness of the palace. The air inside the building felt cool and soothing, but the tension in Ethan's chest only seemed to grow. He had just agreed to something he never imagined he would. Sharing a bed with an alien diplomat, it felt strange and unfamiliar, but the sincerity in Zara's eyes left him little choice. Zara stopped in front of a door that was slightly ajar. She turned to face him, her expression softening. "This will be your room for the night," she said gently, stepping aside to allow him to enter. "It's important for our people to connect in this way. Sharing a bed shows trust, and we believe that trust is the foundation for any strong relationship." Ethan nodded, unsure of how to respond. He had read about alien customs before, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. What did it mean to share a bed with someone from another species? Was this a sign of friendship, or was it something deeper? He couldn't tell, but Zara's calm demeanor made him feel like this was something normal. Even though his own heart raced in confusion, the room was beautiful, with large windows that offered a stunning view of the alien city outside. The bed was large and soft, its frame made of some shimmering material that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The sheets were a strange, silky texture, and the pillows looked as though they had been shaped to fit perfectly under his head. Zara walked over to the bed, turning to face him once again. "I will give you some time to settle in," she said. "Feel free to make yourself comfortable." Ethan took a deep breath and stepped into the room. As soon as he entered, the door slid shut behind him, making a soft clicking sound. He turned around, feeling strangely isolated from the outside world. For a moment, it felt like the room had closed in around him. The silence was heavy, and he couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his hands resting on his knees. He stared at the sheets, thinking about what Zara had said. Sharing a bed was a custom here, a way to build trust. But did he really trust Zara? Did she trust him? And what did it mean for the future of human-alien relations? A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. He stood quickly, his heart still pounding in his chest. "Come in," he said, his voice a little shakier than he intended. The door slid open to reveal Zara standing in the doorway, her expression calm but not without a hint of curiosity. "Are you comfortable?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. It's different from what I'm used to." Zara smiled, her eyes warm. "I understand." It can be Strash stepped closer to the bed and gestured for him to lie down. "You do not need to worry," she said softly. "We will just rest. No expectations, just peace." Ethan's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Part of him wanted to pull away, to find an excuse to sleep in another room or walk out of the palace altogether. But the other part of him felt oddly comforted by Zara's calmness. She seemed genuine in her desire to help him understand her people's ways, even if it meant stepping outside of his comfort zone. He took a deep breath, trying to settle his nerves. "All right," he said, his voice quieter this time. "I'll try." Zara smiled and lay down beside him, her movements graceful and effortless. Ethan could feel the softness of the bed beneath him, but the real weight on his mind was the closeness. He had never shared a bed with anyone outside of his own family, and even then, it had only been in rare, difficult circumstances. Now, in this alien world, the rules were completely different. As they both lay there, the silence grew. and Ethan felt a growing unease. Zara didn't speak, but her presence was calming, even though his mind kept running in circles. What did it all mean? Would they talk? Would something happen that he wasn't prepared for? A few minutes passed, and Zara finally spoke, her voice soft. Ethan, you don't need to be afraid. This is a simple custom for us. We do this to understand each other more deeply, to show respect. You do not need to worry. Ethan nodded, trying to calm himself. He could feel the warmth of her presence. But he still wasn't sure how to react. Her culture was so different, so foreign, and yet he had agreed to follow their customs. I understand, he said. Though he wasn't sure if he did. It's just new to me. Zara turned toward him, her face illuminated by the soft light coming from the window. It is new to many, even to us. But in time, you will see that it is the most honest way to connect. Ethan thought about her words, trying to find some clarity in them. May he had never been one to show his emotions easily, but here, in this strange world, he felt exposed. He had agreed to share a bed, a simple act of trust. Zara had said, but the quietness between them was almost deafening. Ethan didn't know what to do next. Should he speak? Should he ask her more questions about her world? Or should he wait for her to guide the conversation? He had never been in a situation where silence felt so heavy. His mind drifted to his mission. Was he here to simply learn their customs? Or was there something more he was supposed to understand? The alien people seemed peaceful, but could he truly build a relationship between humans and them? Could trust really be built through something as simple as sharing a bed? The room was so still. The silence was almost suffocating now, as though both of them were waiting for something to happen. Ethan's heart began to race again, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense of being out of place. He had no idea how to connect with Zara beyond the simple words they had exchanged. Then, as if sensing his unease, Zara shifted slightly, turning her head to face him. Her eyes were open now, glowing softly in the low light of the room. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The room felt even quieter now, and Ethan could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. It's hard, isn't it? Zara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, not knowing what comes next. Ethan blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected her to speak first, especially after such a long stretch of silence. But her words, though simple, made him feel a little less alone. Yeah, he replied, his voice a little hoarse. It's a lot to take in. Zara smiled faintly, her eyes understanding. I know, it's different from what you're used to, but that's how we learn. We trust. Even when it's hard, Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't have the right words to explain what he was feeling, but Zara seemed to understand. There was no judgment in her gaze, just a quiet patience. He realized that this was how her people functioned, by giving each other space to understand, to build that trust slowly. Back home, Ethan said after a pause, we don't do things like this. Sharing a bed with someone, especially someone you just met, it's not normal. Zara's gaze softened, and she shifted again, her voice gentle. I understand, but here, we believe that our connection is deeper than physical. It is about sharing our experiences, our thoughts, and our trust. The bed is just the beginning. Ethan took in her words, trying to process them. Was it really just about trust? Was this how she truly saw the act? As something that was not about closeness in the traditional sense, but about understanding and growing together. He wanted to ask her more, but something in her expression told him she was waiting for him to understand without needing to ask too many questions. She wasn't pushing him, just letting him absorb the weight of what she had said. As the night stretched on, Ethan tried to let go of his discomfort, to focus less on the strange customs and more on Zara's words. She was right. They were in an entirely different world, where trust was shown in ways he had never imagined. He had always thought that human connections were complicated enough, with all their unspoken rules and subtle gestures. But here, it seemed like things were simpler, more direct. Ethan turned his head to the side and looked at Zara once again. This time, there was no fear or confusion in his gaze, just a quiet curiosity. Maybe this was the point. Maybe this was what he needed to understand in order to truly build the kind of relationship between humans. And these people, I think I get it, Ethan said quietly, his voice steady now. It's not about what's comfortable. It's about learning to trust in ways that are new to us. Zara's eyes softened, and she gave a small nod. Exactly. And when trust is built, there's nothing that can't be shared. Ethan smiled faintly. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but for the first time since he arrived, he felt a little lighter. Maybe, just maybe, this strange world held more answers than he had imagined. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt peaceful, like to people who didn't need to speak to understand each other. Ethan let his eyes close, the steady rhythm of Zara's breathing beside him making him feel less alone in the vast, unfamiliar world. For now, this was enough. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more challenges. But for tonight, Ethan was content to simply trust the process. And that was the first step in understanding the alien world and perhaps himself. The night passed slowly, and Ethan found himself drifting in and out of sleep. The soft, rhythmic breathing of Zara beside him was oddly calming. And despite the strangeness of the situation, he felt less anxious than he had at the start of the night. The bed was comfortable, the sheets soft, and Zara's presence, while unusual, seemed to bring a sense of peace to the room. But as the hours stretched on, something strange began to happen. Ethan woke suddenly, his eyes snapping open. The room was dark, and the quietness was so absolute that he could almost hear his own thoughts echoing. He turned his head slightly, and for a moment, he thought he saw a soft, glowing light coming from the corner of the room. The air felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the atmosphere itself was alive. He was about to sit up when he realized that Zara was no longer lying beside him. Instead, she stood near the far wall, her body silhouetted against the glowing light. The glow seemed to pulse, breathing in rhythm with her. "Zara," Ethan called out softly, his voice thick with sleep. Without turning around, Zara spoke. "Do not be afraid. This is part of our custom." Ethan sat up slowly, still unsure of what was happening. His heart began to race. He had never experienced anything like this before, and he wasn't sure if he should be frightened or fascinated. "What is this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara finally turned to face him, and Ethan could see that her eyes were glowing now, a brilliant blue that matched the soft light in the room. "This is a shared dream," she explained gently. "When we sleep together, we can enter each other's dreams. It is a way to share our memories, our thoughts, and our feelings. It is a sacred part of our culture." Ethan's mind struggled to process her words. A shared dream. He had heard of people sharing dreams and legends and stories, but he never thought it was possible, let alone with an alien. "You mean you can see what I dream about?" Ethan asked, his voice shaky. Zara nodded. "Yes, and you can see mine." Ethan felt a strange chill run through him. It felt like stepping into a completely different world, one where the rules of reality no longer applied. But Zara's presence remained calm and assured, and somehow he found the strength to trust her. "Don't worry," Zara said softly, her voice reassuring. "You will understand when it happens." As soon as she spoke those words, the air around Ethan seemed to shift, the room faded away, and he suddenly found himself standing in a vast, empty landscape. The sky above him was a deep, unending purple, and the ground was made of smooth, glass-like stones that stretched for miles. Ethan looked around, bewildered, trying to make sense of his surroundings. He wasn't alone. Zara stood beside him, her eyes still glowing, and she gestured for him to follow. Without saying anything, she began walking forward, and Ethan found himself compelled to follow. The landscape around them began to shift as they moved, like a painting coming to life. The ground cracked and split, and towering structures began to rise from the earth, tall spires that seemed to pierce the sky. "This is my home," Zara's voice echoed in the vastness. "This is where I come from." Ethan looked around in awe. The buildings were unlike anything he had ever seen, shaped like flowers, twisting upwards in delicate patterns. The air was thick with energy, as if the very land was alive with history. Zara stopped in front of a large structure that looked like a temple, with golden light streaming from within. She turned to Ethan. "This is where my people first connected with the stars. It is the heart of our civilization." Ethan stepped closer to the temple, his curiosity growing. But before he could ask more questions, the scene changed again. Now, he found himself standing in a bustling city, the streets crowded with beings of all shapes and sizes. Some were tall, like Zara, with shimmering skin, while others were smaller and more delicate-looking. The sky above was a vivid orange, with two suns casting long shadows across the city. "This is the city where I grew up," Zara said softly, her voice filled with a sense of longing. "I spent many years here, learning about my people, their ways, their history." Ethan could feel the emotions in her words, even though they were spoken with such quiet calm. It was like he was experiencing her memories, living through the moments she had lived. The city was alive with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and music. He could feel the pulse of life in every corner, and he realized that this was a place of great importance to Zara. He glanced over at her, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of vulnerability. "This is why we share our dreams," Zara continued, her voice softening. "To understand one another, to see the pain and the joy we have lived through. Only then can we truly build a future together." The storm cleared, and the city returned to its peaceful state. The warmth of the suns bathed them in light once more, and Zara's expression became calm again. Ethan nodded slowly, his heart heavy with the emotions he had just experienced. He understood now. This shared dream wasn't just about understanding Zara. It was about understanding the deep, shared history of her people, and maybe, just maybe, it was the key to building the connection he had come here to create. As the dream began to fade, Ethan's eyes opened slowly. He was back in the bed, the quiet room surrounding him once again. Zara was still lying beside him, her breathing steady and calm. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't felt before. The shared dream had shown him something far more important than any words could express. It had shown him Zara's past, her pain, and her hopes for the future. For the first time since arriving on this strange world, Ethan felt like he understood. The morning sun rose slowly, casting long shadows across the room. Ethan blinked as he stirred from sleep, the memories of the shared dream still vivid in his mind. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes, and looked over at Zara. She was still asleep beside him, her breathing steady and calm. The peacefulness of the moment felt like a strange contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts in his head. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him during the dream. It wasn't just that he had seen Zara's memories, it was that he had felt them. The joy, the pain, the love, and the loss. It was as if for a brief moment, they had become more than just two strangers from different worlds. They had shared something deeper, something that transcended words and customs. Zara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She smiled softly when she saw him sitting up, and for the first time, Ethan saw a warmth in her expression that made him feel more at ease. "Good morning," she said, her voice gentle, like the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. "Good morning," Ethan replied, his voice still a little rough from sleep. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling a little unsure of what to say next. The night had been strange enough, and the dream even more so. But there was something undeniable about the connection they shared now. Zara sat up beside him, her eyes searching his face as if waiting for him to say something more. "How do you feel?" she asked, her tone soft but sincere. Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I think I understand now. I mean, more than I did before." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "Sharing that dream, it made me see how much more there is to your world, to your people." Zara nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "That is the point. To see beyond what is in front of you and understand the deeper meaning behind actions." Behind words, Ethan felt the weight of her words settle on him. She was right. The dream had shown him so much more than any conversation could have. But there was still so much more to learn. and he felt as though he was only beginning to scratch the surface of what Zera's world truly meant. I don't know if I can fully understand everything about your culture, Ethan admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. But I want to try. Zera's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. That is all I ask, she said softly. Understanding is a process. It cannot be rushed, and it must be built on trust. Trust. Ethan had heard that word so many times since his arrival, but it felt different now. He had shared a bed with Zera, experienced her memories, and felt the connection grow between them. But trust, real trust, was something that had to be earned, and he wasn't sure he was ready to offer it completely yet. But there was something in Zera's gaze, something in the way she spoke, that made him believe she wasn't just talking about surface-level trust. She was asking for something deeper. Something that required him to open himself up to a world completely different from his own. I don't know if I can ever fully understand everything about you, Ethan said slowly, his voice thoughtful. But I want to try. I want to see things from your perspective, to build that trust. Just like you said. Zera nodded again, her eyes shining with approval. That is all I ask of you. To walk this path with me, not as strangers, but as equals who seek understanding. Ethan felt something shift inside him. The unease that had lingered since he first arrived seemed to fade just a little. For the first time, he felt like he might actually have a place here, a purpose in this strange new world. He looked at Zera, her calm presence a steady anchor in the whirlwind of his thoughts. What happens now? He asked, the question lingering between them. Zera's expression softened, and she rose from the bed, her movements fluid and graceful. Now, she said, we continue. We take the next step in our journey together. We learn from each other, and we see where that takes us. Ethan stood up as well, his mind buzzing with all the possibilities. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't alone on it. Zera was there, and for the first time since he arrived, he felt like he wasn't just an outsider. He was part of something bigger. Will you come with me? Zera asked, turning toward the door. There's much to show you, and many more lessons to be learned. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before nodding. I'm ready. As they walked through the palace, Zera began to explain more about her people's history, their culture, and their vision for the future. She spoke of their desire for peace, for cooperation with humanity, and for finding common ground between their two species. Ethan listened intently, absorbing every word. It was fascinating, yet humbling at the same time. The depth of Zera's world, the complexity of her people's customs, and the weight of their shared history was overwhelming. But the more she spoke, the more he realized that there was much to be learned from them if only he was willing to open himself up completely. As they reached a large window that overlooked the alien city, Zera stopped and turned to him. Do you see it? She asked, her voice quiet. Ethan looked out at the sprawling city below, the shining buildings and glowing streets stretching as far as the eye could see. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, beautiful, otherworldly, and alive. I see it, he said softly, his voice filled with wonder. Zera smiled, a look of satisfaction on her face. Good, because this is only the beginning. There's so much more to discover. Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of purpose growing within him. He was beginning to understand, beginning to trust. The journey was just starting, but he was no longer afraid. He was ready to take. They are not easy to understand, are they? Ethan sighed, his gaze fixed on the city below, the glowing streets, the peaceful sounds of the night. It was all so different from the chaos of Earth. But despite the beauty, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still a stranger here. It's not that I don't want to understand, Ethan said, his voice low. It's just everything feels so different. I don't know if I'm ever going to get it. Zera was quiet for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. It takes time, she said softly, and it takes trust, not just in me, but in yourself. You must believe that you are capable of learning, of adapting. Only then will you truly understand. Ethan looked at her, trying to absorb her words. He had come here to learn, to build bridges between humans and aliens. But every step felt like a struggle, He had been trained for this mission, but no amount of training could have prepared him for the complexity of Zera's world. "I want to understand," he said finally, his voice filled with frustration. "But sometimes I feel like I'm just not getting it, like I'm failing at this whole thing." Zera reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "You are not failing," she said softly. "You are learning, and learning is never easy. It is a path that is full of confusion and doubt, but it is also full of discovery and growth." Ethan looked down at her hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. He hadn't come this far to give up now. But the path ahead wasn't just about learning the alien customs, it was about trusting in the process. Trusting in Zera, and most importantly, trusting in himself. He took a deep breath and nodded. "I guess I have a lot more to learn than I thought." Zera smiled gently. "That is the first step, the willingness to learn, and I am here to guide you, to help you see what I see. But remember, it is not just about me showing you my world, it is also about you showing me yours." Ethan raised an eyebrow, unsure of what she meant. "You have your own customs, your own history," Zera explained. "We cannot build a true bond without sharing both sides. Your world is just as important as mine, and the more we learn from each other, the stronger our connection will become." Her words were simple, yet they carried a depth that made Ethan realize something important. This wasn't just about him adapting to Zera's world, it was about both of them learning to meet in the middle, to share and trust one another. The human world had its own customs, its own history, and perhaps it was time for him to share more of that with Zera. "I never thought about it that way," Ethan admitted. "I guess I've been so focused on fitting in here that I haven't really thought about how to share my own world with you." Zera nodded. "That is why trust is so important. We cannot expect to connect if we only offer half of ourselves. We must offer all of who we are, and that includes both the parts we are proud of and the parts we fear to show." Ethan paused, reflecting on her words. Trust. It was the foundation of everything. He had been focused on learning Zera's world, but he hadn't fully realized that Zera was also trying to understand his. She wanted to know more about him, about humanity, not just as a representative of Earth, but as a person with his own story, his own experiences. "I think I understand," he said slowly. "It's not just about learning your ways. It's about sharing mine too." Zera's smile was gentle, but there was a spark of approval in her eyes. "Exactly. Now you are beginning to understand. And when you share your world with me, I will learn from you just as you learn from me. Only then will we truly begin to bridge the gap between our people." Ethan sat back in his chair, his mind racing. There was still so much to understand, so much to learn. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was one worth traveling, and with Zera's guidance, he felt a little less alone in the journey. "Thank you," he said quietly, looking at her with gratitude, "for helping me see that." Zera nodded, her eyes filled with warmth. "It is my honor. Now, let us continue this journey together." As the night wore on, they sat together in silence, watching the lights of the city flicker below. The bond between them was growing stronger with each passing moment, and Ethan knew that. No matter how difficult the road ahead might be, he was no longer walking it alone. The next few days felt different. Ethan could feel the shift inside him, a growing sense of understanding that had started to take root. Ever since he had shared his first true conversation with Zera, they had shared so many experiences together, the silent connection, the shared dream, and the quiet walks through her world. Now, every moment spent with her felt like a new piece of the puzzle coming together. Ethan had spent much of his time reflecting on what Zera had said about trust, how it wasn't just about adapting to the alien world, but also about sharing his own world with her. In the beginning, he had been focused solely on learning about her customs, her history, and her people. But now, he understood that it was just as important to let Zera in, to let her understand his own history and the world he came from. Zera, too, had opened up to him. She had shared more of her past, her struggles, and the challenges her people faced. Through their conversations, Ethan realized that they weren't so different after all. Both of them had grown up in worlds filled with conflict, uncertainty, and hope. They had both experienced loss, though in different ways, and they both yearned for a better future for their people. One evening, as they stood on the balcony together, looking out over the peaceful city, Ethan turned to Zara, a new sense of clarity in his eyes. "Zara," he said, his voice filled with determination, "I think I'm starting to understand. It's not about just fitting in with your world. It's about building something together, our two worlds, side by side. We both have something valuable to offer." Zara's gaze met his, and she smiled softly. "Yes, Ethan. That is the foundation of trust. It is not enough to simply learn about each other. We must offer our own truths, our own histories, to create something new, something better." Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of hope within him. "I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been focusing so much on learning your ways. But I've forgotten to share my own world with you. Earth isn't perfect, but it's where I come from, and maybe I can help you understand it, just as you've helped me understand yours." Zara's smile deepened, and she placed a hand gently on his arm. "That is exactly what I wanted to hear. It is not about perfection. It is about openness, honesty, and a willingness to learn together." They stood there for a while, side by side, watching the glowing lights of the city below. For the first time since his arrival, Ethan felt like he was truly part of something. His mind had been racing with thoughts of his mission, his purpose here, but now he understood that it was not just about diplomacy. It was about connection, real, deep, and personal connection. The next morning, Zara invited him to a council meeting. It was the first time he would meet with the leaders of her people, and he was nervous. He had been preparing for this moment ever since he arrived, but now that it was here, he felt unsure of what to expect. Would they accept him? Would they see him as just another outsider? Or would they see the trust that had grown between him and Zara? As they walked into the council hall, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The room was vast, with high ceilings and walls covered in intricate designs that seemed to tell stories of the past. The leaders of Zara's people sat at a long table, their eyes watching him with a mix of curiosity and caution. Ethan stood beside Zara, who gave him a reassuring smile before stepping forward. "These are the leaders of my people," Zara said, her voice steady. "They have heard of your mission, and they are willing to listen." Ethan took a deep breath and stepped forward, meeting the eyes of each leader. There were no words at first, just silence as the council studied him. He felt the weight of their gazes, but instead of shrinking away, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. This was it. This was the moment where everything he had learned and shared would come together. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I come from a planet called Earth. I know that we are different, that our worlds are far apart, but I also know that we have more in common than we think. I've spent time learning about your world, your people, and I'm ready to share mine with you." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. The room was silent, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if he had said the wrong thing. But then, one of the leaders, a tall figure with silver skin, spoke. "Your words are simple, but they carry weight," the leader said, his voice deep and thoughtful. "You are not like the others who have come to us with promises of peace and understanding. You have shown us that you are willing to learn, to trust. That is rare." Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of hope. "I believe that trust is the key. It's not just about understanding each other's cultures, it's about building something together. I want to work with you, not just as a representative of Earth, but as a person who believes in the possibility of a better future." The leader nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "Perhaps there is more to you than we first believed, human. But trust, as you say, must be earned. Your actions will show us who you truly are." Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had known that this moment would be difficult, but hearing those words of acceptance, even tentative, gave him hope. This was just the beginning, but it was a good beginning. Zara's smile was proud as she looked at him. "You have done well, Ethan. Now, let us continue to build the trust that will shape our future." As they left the council hall, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The journey was far from over, but now he knew that it was not just about bridging the gap between two worlds. It was about building a bridge of trust, of understanding, that would carry both humanity and Zare's people into the future. And for the first time since arriving, Ethan believed that it was possible.